Welcome to Expedition Networking, a special segment of the Networking RX podcast. I'm Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and your host for this program. For those of you who are familiar, on the Networking RX podcast, we share information and have conversations with experts, such as authors, researchers, and social scientists. And all of these programs are aimed at helping you learn how to become better at building professional relationships and understanding why they work. In this Expedition Networking segment, however, we're going to bring on successful entrepreneurs and unique professionals and explore their networking adventure and learn how they used relationships to create lasting success. Today on Expedition Networking, we have Tanya Scotece. She is a professor of funeral service education at Miami-Dade College, which is near Miami, Florida. She's a non-traditional student because she began her academic career as a single mom at the age of 35. She persevered, as most single moms do, and continued her education and earning a PhD in curriculum and instruction through the College of Education at the University of South Florida, which is in Tampa, the other side of the state. And she's a licensed funeral director and has worked in the profession since 2003. And there's a story behind all that, which I find interesting. And she took a leap of faith, having transitioned from the funeral home setting where she was a manager to academia, now inspiring the future funeral directors out there, easy for me to say. Tanya, welcome. I guess your students call you Dr. T, is that?
Yes, they do. Thank you, Frank. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast this afternoon. It's an honor.
Now, I think a funeral director, this is all very sexist, all very prejudicial. I think of funeral directors as, 50-year-old bald guys, overweight. Most people are listening to this. You're not bald. You're not overweight. You're not a guy. You're very non-traditional in lots of ways. So, and I want you to kind of share the story as to how you head down this path of getting into this industry.
Sure, be happy to. So my journey with funeral services actually started at the age of 12 years old. And it all started with the chandeliers, and I got them on today. Here we go for the earrings, those of you listening. So basically, I was born and raised in Connecticut, Hartford area, and I went to my first wake at the age of 12 years old, and the wake was for my mom's friend's mother. So I had no relationship to the deceased when I entered the funeral home, and I was greeted by the traditional men in black, and the chandeliers just have inspired me. There was like tons of chandeliers above me. And I was so fascinated. I walked in and was just mesmerized by the formality and the pomp and circumstances of what I experienced. And I went up to pay my respects to the casket. And obviously there was a woman in there fully made up. And I paid my respects. And I remember leaning over the casket and looking at my mom, and I wanted to poke the lady. I'd never seen a dead person before. And my mom's like, you're not supposed to touch the deceased. You're supposed to say a prayer and let them rest in peace. So I said, okay. So I said my prayer and, may she rest in peace. And then I sat back down in the pew and was so fascinated that I saw a man's name on the other side of the funeral home. So I asked my mom, I said, can I go visit him? And she was like, well, you're supposed to know the people and not just barge in on people's, wakes or visitations. But I did. And I was the shy kid. So it was very out of character for me to be that, kind of outgoing at that moment in time. But basically, I never forgot that moment. And, life puts you kind of on its own path or detour. And I ended up working in the medical office field for probably almost 20 years, and worked my way from file clerk to receptionist, billing, coding, all the way up to manager. And I was with the same company from the age of 16 years old, working part-time, all the way to my early 30s. And at that point, I had gone through 3 mergers with the company and finally decided to take my first leap of faith. And I went to manage a surgeon's office in Connecticut at Hartford Hospital. And one day driving to the office, Nothing out of the ordinary, just normal day. I arrived at the office and I literally picked up the phone and called the local funeral home in Hartford, Connecticut. And I asked them, I said, this may seem like a strange question, but I want to know what you do and what you call yourselves and how can I be like in this funeral profession, and knew nothing of it. And within about, I don't know, an hour or two, they connected me to the National Funeral Director Association, which in turn connected me to the one and only mortuary school in Connecticut, which was about a 30-minute drive. So on my lunch hour, I drove to the school, met the director, and lo and behold, by the afternoon, by the time my boss came out of surgery, I was enrolled in mortuary school, taking my first accounting class, and felt like a fish out of water when it started. But to jump forward a little bit, Frank, my boss had a heart attack and we had to close the surgical practice one semester of me shy of me completing my mortuary degree, which is an associate's degree. And it was not like a thought out plan as far as like, how am I going to transition from managing this office to doing an internship? It was truly something that was inspired in me. And, I can talk to you a little bit more about it with the students, but how I tell folks, it's like, if this field has touched you in some shape, way, or form, then it will find a way for you to be in it. Because sometimes it really, truly, it's just, there's no words to say like, like I'm going to be an accountant, or I'm going to be, a firefighter, or I'm going to be a police officer. It's like the funeral profession, it's really, really fascinating how people get called to it. And that was my calling to the funeral profession.
Interesting. So did this all started up in Connecticut, and now you're in Florida? How did that all transpire? Not that that's a bad move. I mean, it's most people would say, oh, great. How did she do it?
Yes. Yeah. So Hartford, Connecticut is where I'm born and raised, traditional Italian, Irish background. And when my boss had to close the practice, I was really close in finishing my associate's degree. My family decided it was time to maybe relocate, small Italian family, but we're like the bandwagon, like you uproot and off you go. So we uprooted and went to the west coast of Florida. And I did my internship there at Farley Funeral Homes and Crematory under the direction of Michelle and John Williams. And it was a great experience. I did my internship, which is 1 year. And upon completion of that, I stayed on with them for just over 12 and a half years. But my professors on the academic side, again, I was very late, non-traditional, going to school, as a single mom. And I didn't think I was a quote unquote academic. I mean, nothing about me is ivory tower by any stretch of the imagination. But my professors always encouraged me every time I was close in finishing one degree. They would say, look into another program, look into another degree. So I did. And by the time I was done mortuary, I kind of got the hang of it and, went on for, my bachelor's and then my master's. And then I thought I was done there. And then one professor, Doc Thomas, he inspired me to go ahead and further my career, and ended up earning my doctorate at the University of South Florida in Tampa, like you mentioned. And for me, it's just been quite the journey, because it's not like I sought this career out, or it's not like I sought to be a professor or had any intentions. Like even when I was in mortuary school, I wanted to be the restorative artist of the stars. Like that was where I thought my forte was.
Right.
So I just, sometimes it's like some things bigger, higher than you just kind of inspire and motivate us. And so that's how I ended up in Florida, to answer your question.
Okay. What'd you do your dissertation on?
All my research has been in funeral services in some shape or way or form. And that starts all the way from my bachelor's on up. So for example, anything death related, I did, death and drugs, death and homicide, death and MRSA. But my dissertation was, so what I experienced having worked at the funeral home, I was in charge of HR and, hiring upcoming interns, funeral directors, funeral assistants. And I noticed that a lot of the people that were being interviewed were very, what I termed as goth-like, with, for example, pink, green, blue hair, visible tattoos and piercings. And depending on the funeral home, most of the funeral homes have a very formal dress code. It's a pretty conservative field.
Yeah.
But it's just a conservative field. So, and of course, as an HR manager, it's not my position to tell people that, this is, we have you can go through your handbook, but you can just tell that some folks were more along the non-traditional route of funeral services. And I think that my dissertation really inspired, hopefully, the profession, because I actually did it on hireability within the profession of folks having tattoos and piercings, as far as if there's any, pros or cons to them getting hired.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say you're the first person I've met in the funeral industry. Jamie, Charchet, I introduced you to. She's probably the first. But
yes. Awesome.
we have lots of interaction with police officers, good, bad, or indifferent. Firefighters are kind of out there and visible, or very visible to us, in a lot of professions. And then the funeral business is one of these businesses where there's just not a lot of interaction. Hopefully not a lot of interaction. I think as we move along in life, there's probably more of it. So most people don't have this. Interesting. And then from there, how did you end up at Miami-Dade?
So I was, again, at the funeral home back, it was 2018. And I could have stayed there very comfortably till I retired, and probably another 15, 20 years. And I had completed my PhD in 2015, December 2015. And I really felt like I'm not utilizing it at the funeral home. Like, as long as I had my funeral director embalmer license, I didn't really need more than that to do the job I was doing. And somewhere along the way, a friend of mine, Melanie Wysinski, actually contacted me and said that she saw a post on one of the academic sites and said that there was a tailor-made position for me in academia. And I had not even looked at academia. It wasn't, again, like I was seeking to be a professor.
Right.
And she sent me the job description, and I applied. And I think it was 3 or 4 interviews later, quite a formal, introduction process to the college. I was hired as a full-time professor and teaching mortuary sciences. So for students who are looking to become funeral director embalmers, or in Florida, we do have a funeral director only certificate. And so I think at that moment, it was really a turning point for me, because yes, I could have stayed at the funeral home. I've never had a desire to own my own funeral home. That's a common question I get from folks. It's, did you ever want to own your own? And really, that's never, both of my parents were business owners, owning, different businesses. And that was never a strong passion of mine. So when the opportunity came, it's like, wow, I have the credential that they're looking for. They want the credential, right? Because you have to have, certain level of education to be able to teach. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to put it out there to the universe. And I applied and got the position. And I just completed in my 3rd academic year. So I started, 2018, the fall of 18.
Yeah, that's again, I've heard this story before, but I'm fascinated by it because it's got all these twists and turns. And if you could go back to high school, what advice would you give to young Tanya? Not whether she would take it. That's a whole nother conversation, but
yeah, I think, I don't know if it's being based maybe because of Italian background, but being, I think with my traditional upbringing, there's always shame and guilt involved in everything that we do. So I think looking back at my little self, I would probably say, like, really not to, not to worry as much, and not to, just kind of like let things happen and let things allow, and try not to make things happen. I think sometimes there's so much pressure on younger folks to know what they want to be. And I think that's almost like, even the students that I currently, teach and inspire, hopefully, some of them are, 50, 60 years old coming into the program, and they'll say, this is my first semester, professor, I'm too old. And it's like, you know what, we all are on a journey, and I don't think it's an end all be all, like, you seek out to do this, and now this is your career for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
So I think And I think maybe years ago, maybe after like World War II, that was a more common thing where people had one position, for example, like as a machinist for that amount of time. But nowadays, I think people, with maybe going back to school, trying something different, we're not locked in. So I think that's what I would tell myself is just, not to worry as much and to really try new experiences. I think that's another thing. I think I don't know, being, high school is a rough age well, I'm going to speak for myself. I don't know. For me, it was very difficult. You want to fit in and, maybe you're not the most popular kid or you're not the smartest kid. And it's a lot of like peer involvement. And I think we don't try things that are open to us. We don't allow ourselves like, maybe I could have tried art, even though I can't draw a stick figure, but I think we just kind of were so narrow minded on what we think we should be doing, maybe by parental influences or familial influences or our peers, that we don't really know until you really listen to your inner voice. And I think I can truly say that was my inner voice saying, call the funeral home and find out how you can get in this profession. Because it never came out of anywhere else anyone that I knew.
Yeah, no, I think your comment about not trying things, looking back at high school and college, there were people that I wish I would have gotten to know better, but didn't because they didn't fit the clique, or I don't know. It's just it's silly, it's stupid, it's short-sighted. For those listening, Tanya and I met was certainly through the wonder of LinkedIn, but due in part to the fact that I'm involved with AmSpirit, and she's president and education coordinator, education coordinator in BNI, which is a competitor. So we've had a lot of nice conversations around these organizations, our respective organizations. I guess, Tanya, you're kind of in a business. I mean, BNI's referrals, but you're in a business where I guess there's referrals. I mean, I'm ignorant. I don't know. I mean,
yes, I love our symbiotic, business relationship, Frank, because from the outside looking in, it probably would be like, wow, like why is somebody, from your company, having me from BNI on your podcast? But it truly shows you the philosophy of givers gain, and enough people to meet, enough business to be had. I was introduced to BNI 12 and a half years ago when I moved to Florida, and it was a great way for me to network and have resources and meet people. And when I moved to the East Coast of Florida, I didn't know anybody and I really missed my people. So I went to a couple of chapters and found myself in BNI, and I basically just fundraise for our North Campus food pantry for students. And I just try to, just help people in general. I don't really have a product or a service that I'm quote unquote selling, but I love the relationships that I have met through BNI and through LinkedIn.
Well, I guess that perfect segue. I did want to talk about your charity, not your charity, but the school's charity, and what's it about. And if somebody wants to help, they could certainly help.
Sure. So we have, so what's interesting about Miami-Dade College is that there are 8 campuses in Miami-Dade. And on the North Campus, which is where the funeral service education program is, and just as a fun funeral fact, we are only one of 3 programs in the state of Florida. And nationwide, there's approximately 57 programs that offer mortuary science. So it's a very small niche, so to speak, to use the word in our field. It's not, it's not like going to an English department or a psychology department. It's much more segmented, I would say. But at our college, at the North Campus, we do have a food pantry, and to support our students and students in need of, it can be anything from food donations, tangible donations that the food pantry can utilize to help students in our local community. And they've done a great job even through COVID. There's now we do have specific times the students can pick up meals. Some of them have small children, so any donation, whether it's tangible, non-perishable foods or monetary donations, are welcome. And any visibility and credibility through LinkedIn, just to promote awareness. Sometimes it's in our own literal backyard that we can help people.
That's good. I appreciate you sharing. It's I don't think a lot of campuses have food pantries, or maybe they do. I don't know. It's been a long time since I was Believe me, there were a lot of Sunday nights I was hungry, right? I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. They never had the cafeteria open. Sunday at noon or whatever, 1 o'clock, it was closed, and you're on your own. So, well, I really appreciate your time here today. This has been very, I learned more about you. I continue to learn more about you. I'm very intrigued. So, thank you for sharing.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's always an inspiration to be able to share my story and my journey. And I'll always, throw it out to your listeners that, if anyone has ever had an interest in maybe what the funeral profession is about, sometimes people actually, I'm going to throw this in there too, have some type of like trigger or PTSD from maybe having had an experience when they were younger. So over my career, I've helped quite a few people kind of get over that. So if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'd be more than happy to, facilitate a conversation with them, or maybe even inspire them with moving in a different direction in their own career. So Miami-Dade 2-year program, associate degree in funeral service education, and they too can be called and touched by the funeral profession.
All right, I'll put your LinkedIn profile, a link to your profile in the description of the podcast.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much.
To wrap things up, remember, we're looking for some enterprising business types to join our team as franchisees of AmSpirit Business Connections. Our franchisees work with entrepreneurs, sales representatives, and professionals in their area to help them become more successful through networking and the exchange of quality business referrals in a structured weekly morning meeting. This is a unique franchise opportunity, you see, because these meetings are in the morning. A successful business type or professional can add this franchise opportunity onto what they're already doing. Again, all of our franchisees do something else. For a couple hours in the morning, a few mornings a week, these franchisees work the AmSpirit Business Connections model. The rest of the time, they're attorneys, accountants, realtors, coaches, and consultants of various kinds. The wonderful thing is that not only do our franchisees realize a financial gain from operating the AmSpirit Business Connections model, but the business networks that they build and develop become a great source of referrals for their primary business as well. Perhaps you know someone, perhaps you are that someone. Whatever the case, to learn more about the AmSpirit Business Connections franchise opportunity, please contact me using the email in the show notes or the one we provide at the end of this program.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.